alongside of us was just a volunteer at the church. Wallace, yeah.
Man.
He had been there since the church started.
Founding member, yeah.
Just so cool.
Yeah.
But not a lot of people building, and there wasn't a long-standing pastor there. The guy that was there, I mean, he's preaching on the weekends and stuff, but he had another job.
Yeah, he had some other stuff lined up. Yeah.
So that's the most common type of merger, where you're dealing with a very small group of people, but maybe they have some property or a building or something like that.
Yeah.
And how to navigate all that. Man, that was an amazing. All of these are just total God stories, because the very first weekend of our campus there, people are getting baptized.
Right.
How awesome is that?
It had been years since they'd seen baptism. They
hadn't even filled up a baptismal tank.
Yeah.
I actually think maybe they had a tank and it was filled with stuff.
I don't remember. That's not uncommon though.
Yeah.
These older buildings, and it's just
they end up using
storage.
the baptismal tank for storage.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, when you think of that on a really deep level, how sad is that?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That
a church is like, man, we know we're not having any baptism. Might as well use this for storage.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for there to be baptisms the very first weekend, amazing.
So cool.
So cool. Yeah. And now, man, it's awesome campus. Yeah. I mean, some weekends are running more than 300 people.
Yeah.
I mean, there's legit stuff going on over there. Amazing kids ministry. I mean, it's rocking and rolling.
Yeah, recently had to expand their parking and had a third service for a while.
Yep.
Like, man, it's just incredible
amazing
stuff.
This is Breaking Barriers, where we help pastors and churches grow so that they can go.
All right. Hey, welcome to the Breaking Barriers podcast. Looking forward to this episode. This is the first episode that I have done with Pastor Randy. Pastor Randy has been on the show before, I think, with Andrew. Is that right?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, today we are going to be doing the first of probably multiple podcasts over the coming months on church mergers and why they're so important. And I'm saying merger, not murder. Randy and I have both told a couple people we were doing podcasts on church mergers, and they thought we said church murders.
Maybe it's the proximity to Halloween,
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that we'll ever do a podcast on church murders, but church mergers are a really big deal. I would say we were at a conference last week, and I was talking to multiple people, and literally I was in multiple conversations. One with somebody that I helped with a merger about a year ago that was successful. The merger worked, like they went through the whole process. And another conversation with somebody that was kind of on the super front end of a merger. The vast majority of mergers do not end up working out. Mm-hmm. But I thought it would just be really good. I don't know that there's a ton of content out there on mergers. We have been in dozens, right? I mean, probably more than 25 conversations around church mergers, and we've seen 4 that were done successfully.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I just thought, man, this would be a great thing to try to help people walk through this. I would say when I get when somebody reaches out, either through the Summit Collab or something else, I would say this is probably top 3 questions that I get is, man, how do we navigate a church merger?
Yeah. We're hearing a lot of chatter on that. So, I mean, obviously it's something that we want to speak to. I'm sure we'll get into this at a later episode. This is a huge part of my story, and we'll talk about that at some point. But Bobby, I wanted to just kind of set the table for you to kind of speak to this. You've been present for every merger that we've done here at Mercy Hill. Man, why is this such a big deal? Like, what's kind of going on, even beyond the stuff that we're hearing? Like, why is this such a big deal right now in this moment in time?
Yeah, I would say it's a really big deal because it's a huge, I would say, kingdom opportunity for the future. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if, more of these are happening than like 100 years ago or 200 years ago. It kind of seems like it, and I don't know all of the, sociological reasons for that or anything. But what it seems like is, at least in the West and in the United States, over the last 100 years, there were a ton of churches that were started, early 1900s, 1950, those sort of time period.
Yeah.
And, at least in the South, I don't know the exact statistics, but many of those churches, if not almost all of them, are on the decline, or those churches are dying.
Yeah.
And so there's a huge opportunity there in terms of, being able to breathe new life into those churches. And we're not really talking about revitalizing, mergers a little bit beyond, kind of a step beyond that. I would say it's also an opportunity because there are so many churches that have been planted over the last 20 years, even the last 5 years, and just personally, our church is planting churches, we're coaching church planters, and so we're in these conversations. I think every single church that we have planted, within the first 18 months, they find themselves in a church merger discussion, right? Because maybe they're renting space from, a plateaued or dying church, and, there's some relationship that's developed there. And then before they know it, that church is saying, hey, man, you guys have some young people, you have some momentum, there's life change, maybe there's baptisms happening at their church. Hey, we have a building here, it's cool what you guys are doing. It's different than what we're doing, but it's really cool what you're doing. And man, can we maybe do this merger thing?
It's a tremendous kingdom impact opportunity, because with church plants, you have a lot of passion. Usually with a healthy church plant, you've got really strong vision. What you don't have is funding, and what you don't have is space to meet. So a lot of them are meeting in theaters or something like that. Well, with a declining church, or a church that's kind of, on that downward slope, man, they got buildings in abundance. Some of them have more buildings than they can even manage, because it's just the maintenance has become
that's super common,
way too much. A lot of times they have money in the bank that could be leveraged for kingdom purposes, but the vision just kind of isn't there anymore. So if you can successfully bring those two things together, there's amazing opportunity for kingdom impact.
Yeah, and I would say it's sad, when you go to certain places, bigger cities and stuff, and you see, these old historic churches. And they're now, whatever. Art studio, biker bar, just like whatever.
Yeah, it's becoming popular to turn them into homes too, which, the kind of handyman in me is like, oh, that's pretty cool. But then you think about it, it's like, man, that was an expression of the body of Christ that is no longer meeting. It's really sad. Yeah,
it's sad because, you think of some big city and a church has some huge building, or not even a huge building, just like an older, nice building. That's not where they started. You know what I mean? Man, they constituted that church, and I'm sure with a small group of people, and that church grew, and, there's probably life change happening, and they cast the vision, and they raised the money and all of the work to get to a point to build a building like that. And then to see the decline happen so much so that there's just some random other business in the building now.
It's an interesting thought. I mean, we don't know who all is listening to this podcast, but there's probably some people that are kind of in both scenarios. Some people who are like, yeah, man, we've got all the vision and the passion and the people in the world. We just don't have the space. And then you've got other churches that maybe have been in that decline for a while. I mean, how would you speak to those people who are maybe in the declining camp and just kind of looking at this in a very negative sense? Try to give a biblical sort of perspective, or thought around that for people who are maybe in that space, just about church life cycle and things like that.
So they're in a church that's maybe declining?
Yeah. I think that sometimes there can be guilt around that.
Yeah. Well, one, I mean, you think about none of the churches that, the New Testament books are written about, none of those churches exist anymore, The Big C church exists, right? Mm-hmm. Man, the body of Christ, the people, the movement. But the little c local church in different areas, it's like, man, churches are started, they grow, they plateau, and they die at some point, right? Yeah. I mean, that's just the reality. Yeah. Churches that Paul planted, he was awesome, much better than us. Many, if not all of those churches are dead now. Someone may argue, oh, this church in North Africa has been there 2,000 years, whatever. Generally speaking, churches have life cycles, they die.
Yeah.
So first, I would just say, well, man, that must be within God's plan. Within his sovereignty to allow new things to start and plateau and then die one day.
Yeah.
And so it's nothing to be ashamed over. It's like, man, Mercy Hill, we obviously are a younger church. We're on an upward trend.
Yeah.
But in all likelihood, if Jesus don't come back 100 years from now, Mercy Hill will probably not be here and die, and hopefully some other awesome younger church is thriving. And I don't know, maybe we give them all our buildings. I don't know.
I think it's an important conversation, and it's important for people to have that sort of larger perspective on everything, because there can be, I was on the other side of this, and there can be a little bit of a sense of failure and a little bit of guilt or a little bit of shame. But when you think about it in the way that you just framed it, it's like, no, we can actually honor what God has done with these churches that are now in decline. Like they had, everyone that we've talked to, they had their heyday where God was moving, people were being baptized, new ministry was being started in that part of the city or the town. And God did amazing things in each and every one of those rooms. And that's important to honor that and to then begin to think about, okay, what could be next,
Yeah, and I think just within God's sovereignty, like, man, there are headwinds and tailwinds that we just don't control,
Right. COVID.
Yeah, so some of those churches could be plateauing or dying because, maybe they lost the mission and the mission's not at the forefront, and now it's programs and it's making people happy. And
right.
But other churches are plateauing or dying because at one point in time, the area they were in was a thriving area, and industries change, cities change. You think of certain towns between 1920 and 1950 that like maybe that town was like really thriving.
Yeah.
And there was a major industry there, right. And then that industry moved away.
Yeah.
It's like, well, man,
happens all the time.
The whole town left. This town used to have 100,000 people. Now there's 10,000 people in the town.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's cool, man. I thought it'd probably be helpful for people if you could just share a little bit of our story. We kind of alluded to this earlier. We've got some of this in our past. I alluded a little bit to my story, but you've been here for every single one of those. And so I'd love for you to just kind of like paint a picture for everybody of what mergers have looked like for Mercy Hill in our 12 or 13 year history at this point.
Yeah. So, Pastor Andrew and myself, we've been involved in all of them, and you have also been involved in the majority of them. And a lot of times now, you probably field a lot of the initial questions around mergers, which I thought it'd be good to have you on. I'm sure Pastor Andrew will do some in the future about some of these different stories and stuff. But for us, we've seen 4 successful mergers that, I would just say successful in terms of like they happened.
Yeah.
Most mergers kind of die in the negotiation process of the merger, mm-hmm. right? And we're going to hit a little bit at the end of this podcast. I would say most pastors are sort of set up for failure. Yeah. Most guys, when I talk to them on the very front end of a merger, they are just about to just blow this whole thing up.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, I think pastors are just not wired to be able to kind of negotiate these mergers. And that's what we're going to talk about.
It's not a seminary class, they don't really offer that. So.
Totally. Yeah. So for us, I'll just share like super briefly, and you could kind of touch on these. Yeah. The first merger that we did at Mercy Hill is an amazing story. It actually happened like at the very beginning before we even had public services. We moved here to Greensboro, our small launch team. Another church engaged us. They were a church that was planted like 10 years previous. They had seen some awesome stuff. They had awesome people there. But the pastor who started it, Pastor David, amazing guy, he also God had just blessed him in business, and so he was kind of doing both. And the church, wasn't that large in size at the time. And he caught the vision, and a couple other their elders just caught the vision. Man, this new church, Mercy Hill, coming from the Summit Church, maybe it'd be awesome to merge with them. And man, that threw us off. That was out of nowhere, right? We weren't thinking about church merger.
Yeah.
I don't think until that point in time, I had never thought or even heard of the term church merger.
So such a reminder that God has plans and he's working things that we're not even thinking about, even on our radar.
There was one side, I think, of Andrew and myself of like, dude, we're right in the middle of about to launch this church. This was pre-launching the church. Like, man, can we really spend all this energy over here also? Because, man, we started meeting with them, kind of counseling with them. Mm-hmm. Andrew and I were going and preaching at their church, and it's like, but it all worked out. It was awesome. Like we walked that whole multi-month process with them. It was a small group of people. They didn't really have a building. Like we didn't like inherit a building from them. But on the back end, we did learn, we didn't know at the time, there's pretty significant finances that came with it.
Yeah.
That's not why we were doing it. we didn't even know about that.
Right.
Like we walked the process with this small group of people, and man, they were awesome people. And most of them, even though it was like less than 20 people, most of them are still at Mercy Hill today.
Yeah. And the finances and the people have been so catalytic. When we say people, we're talking staff members, we're talking band members, we're talking people who've been investing in our kids ministry for years and years and years. Like,
yeah,
they like merged all the way in.
It's such a cool story, man, that, we're literally naming our new home and hub that we're constructing. We're literally naming that building after the name of this church.
That's right.
Which is really cool. It's going to be called the Ridge Campus.
Yeah. It's so cool. It's on Pleasant Ridge Road, but it's also it's an homage. It's a reminder of God's faithfulness every time that we say that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Hey, the second merger, I'll let you speak to it very, very briefly, because, man, this is how we connected with you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was at a church called Edgefield. It's about, as the crow flies, a mile from our current broadcast facility. And we had been, thinking about merging for a while. We heard about Mercy Hill. Long story short, we'll get way more into it at some point, I'm sure, but just entered into a process with you guys. And at that time at Edgefield, man, the church was actually doing pretty well. We were seeing baptisms, and we were seeing people into our, new membership class. I don't even remember what we called it back then, but it entered into this process with you guys, and just kind of, I don't know, we caught a vision for what it could be. We saw that God was doing something. I remember the first Mercy Hill service that I ever came to I was a pastor at another church, and I came to see my brother get baptized at a Mercy Hill church service. And I remember leaning over to my wife and saying, like, I kind of want to go to this church. Like, how do we make that happen? But I wasn't the senior pastor. I was an associate pastor. But yeah, long story short, I came on staff at Mercy Hill through that merger process, and my life has just been totally changed through that. And this is my opinion. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I feel like that building has been one of the most catalytic things for our growth since that time. That was 2014. We've used it as a student center. We used it as a campus twice. It was our offices. We have just used the heck out of that facility for all kinds of ministry.
Yeah, totally. That was just an amazing story. I'd say the uniqueness about that merger, not the uniqueness, but just like some of the points around that is there was a lot of people.
That's right.
So typically, for anybody listening, most of the time when you find yourself in a merger situation, I would guess it's going to be less than 50 people. This was over 100 people you guys had at the church. So there was a real uniqueness about that. We had to kind of navigate that a little bit differently.
Yeah.
Because it's like, that's a good chunk of people. And Mercy Hill, I don't know what size we were then.
About 500.
Thinking about bringing 100 people into your church, dude, that's 20% of the church.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You bring 100 wrong people in when you're 500, it's like, that's a problem.
But you bring the right people in, and that's, I don't know if you remember this, that was the summer that we went from 500 to 1,000 in about 3 months. And it wasn't just the merger that caused that. There was some stuff happening in college ministry, and God's hand was on the church.
So it was unique in that it was that many people. The lead pastor, he was going into the military. And so that's always an element in these mergers is like what's going on with the lead pastor. Most merger discussions, I would say 50-50. There's no lead pastor even there. Yeah. When somebody gets approached. Yeah. The church has been on decline, and maybe there's, guys that are going to preach on the weekend or whatever. Yeah. We got a very significant building out of that, and we ended up renovating that building. And like you said, man, that's been super pivotal for all sorts of ministry that we've done over the years. There wasn't really a lot of finances associated with that one, I would say, in terms of finances. And this is how most mergers work. It's going to cost you money. Yeah. Mergers cost money. That's on the side of the person that's being approached, because there's legal fees, and if you do it right, it's going to cost you a good chunk of money, because there, we'll get into this maybe in later episodes, but like there's some real due diligence.
That's right.
You have to do, because you can really screw one of these up big time. Yeah. And it could affect you for a long time into the future. Yeah. Third one, our Mercy Hill and Espanol, or our Northeast campus.
Northeast, yeah.
They were not that far apart, but so our Northeast campus, which was our fourth campus or our fifth campus?
I've lost track.
I think our fourth campus.
Fifth, actually.
Fifth.
Yeah. It was after High Point.
I would say this merger was probably, I would say it's the most common type of merger, I guess.
Yeah, most atypical for what you would
see. I think most of the guys that I'm talking to that come to me that have questions about it, it's these types of stories.
Yeah.
Church was planted, I don't know, mid-1950s.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Had a heyday, awesome stuff. Had a building, had a property, all of that. The church dwindled down to the point when we were approached, I don't know, it was
Just a handful of families.
Less than 20 people, maybe. Yeah. Some amazing people.
Yeah.
The gentleman that walked alongside of us was just a volunteer at the church. Wallace, yeah.
He's the man.
Great guy. He had been there since the church started.
Founding member, yeah.
Which is so cool.
Yeah.
So cool. But not a lot of people building, and there wasn't a long-standing pastor there. The guy that was there, I mean, he's preaching on the weekends and stuff, but he had another job.
Yeah, he had some other stuff lined up. Yeah.
So that's the most common type of merger. Where you're dealing with a very small group of people, but maybe they have some property or a building or something like that.
Yeah.
And how to navigate all that, man. That was an amazing. All of these are just total God stories, because the very first weekend of our campus there, people are getting baptized.
Right.
How awesome is that?
It had been years since they had seen baptism.
They hadn't even filled up a baptismal tank.
Yeah.
I actually think maybe they had a tank and it was filled with stuff.
I don't remember. That's not uncommon though. These older buildings, and it's just
they end up using
storage.
the baptismal tank for storage.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, when you think of that on a really deep level, how sad is that?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That a church is like, man, we know we're not having any baptism. Might as well use this for storage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And for there to be baptisms the very first weekend, amazing.
So cool.
So cool.
Yeah.
And now, man, it's awesome campus.
Yeah.
I mean, some weekends they're running more than 300 people.
Yeah.
I mean, there's legit stuff going on over there. Amazing kids ministry. I mean, it's rocking and rolling.
Yeah, recently had to expand their parking and had a third service for a while.
Yep.
Like, man, it's just incredible
Amazing.
stuff.
The fourth merger is different than all of them, and that's now our Mercy Hill and Espanol campus.
Mm-hmm.
That one's unique. Pastor Andrew, for many years, had a vision for Spanish-speaking ministry. He just kind of personally had that vision, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And Pastor Javier, who leads that, he actually moved here from Cuba to start a new church, and the local association, multiple churches that are part of the association, helped him to start that new church.
Yeah.
And those multiple churches were supporting him. And then post-COVID, obviously, you know, it's hard for all churches going through COVID.
That's right.
Post-COVID, it was like, hey, like something maybe needs to change here. And maybe it would be best if, you know, one church really kind of, you know, I don't know what the word would be, adopted them, brought them in.
Yeah.
And so with Pastor Andrew already having that vision, you know, he was like, man, I would love to do that.
Yeah.
You know, Pastor Javier was still there.
Yeah.
He was still leading it.
Yeah.
He's awesome.
He's the man.
He's a rock star leader.
Yeah.
I mean, just awesome. So that was church merger through adoption.
And they're growing like crazy. They're growing faster than we can find space for them to meet in. It's just been unbelievable to see what God is doing.
They have probably quadrupled at least since that happened.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a couple weekends ago they just had I think it was their 2-year anniversary.
Yeah.
Is that right?
2 or 3.
Yeah. They had over 200 people there.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, amazing. Baptisms happening all the time.
Oh yeah.
So
tons of ministry.
We have walked this road, and I would say for the 4 that were successful, man, there's been way more that never kind of came to pass.
Yeah.
Right? Because they just you begin discussing, and then it ends up just kind of falling apart. And that kind of brings us to the
that's a good segue into kind of this last little section here. I mean, you alluded to this earlier. There's not a seminary class on this. Man, where do most pastors go wrong with this? Like, how does it get screwed up so quickly when it comes to church mergers?
Yeah, I would say most pastors end up kind of messing this up on the very front end. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times when I'm talking to somebody, you know, maybe they're like a month in, you know. You know, you take like our Northeast campus, you know, somebody approaches them from this church, that church is plateauing, declining. Maybe the church is almost dying at this point.
Yeah.
They approach them And then a lot of times that church is a newer church plant. They're like, wow, this could be amazing because they have a building. We don't.
Right.
Oh my goodness. What are we going to do?
They only see upside.
Right.
Yeah.
And then they're a month in, and then I'll talk to them. And a lot of times they're on the verge of just kind of blowing it up.
Yeah.
And I would say for a couple reasons, and there are probably more reasons maybe we can discuss in the future, but if you could distill it down to a couple reasons that I think people end up messing these up. 2 reasons, okay? And they're kind of opposites of one another. And I think to successfully navigate a church merger, you have to actually be in the middle of both of these that I'm going to describe.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first reason people mess these up is you've got to be able to operate in the gray when you do a church merger, because like you said, there's not a handbook. You don't learn this in seminary. Every story is different. Yeah. Every church that approaches you, the background of that church is different. I mean, there will never be 2 of the same church merger stories.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's not a right or wrong.
Some of the principles are the same, but the nuance is what kills people.
Right. So the problem is, we do a lot on our staff with strengths finders, Clifton strengths finders. Mm-hmm. That's not like a biblical thing or anything like that. But one of the strengths is belief. Mm. And it's a little confusing, I think, for believers because we think like that means faith, right? But it doesn't. Belief just means somebody that has belief real high in their strengths. They kind of talk about and they hold all of their beliefs like they have equal weight.
Yeah.
Okay. So somebody that has high belief, they may talk about their diet or, talk about how they think about their retirement or talk about real estate or talk about how they get their car worked on.
Yeah. We're not talking about first order theological belief things.
But they may talk like that. They may talk about that stuff as if it's
in the
like,
same category.
It's like Bible, right?
Right.
And it's not bad. And a lot of times high level leaders, that's how they're wired, right? I mean, they have, to plan a church to do something really great. I mean, you've got to be able to just plow forward with the vision that you have.
Well, it's a superpower. It really is. If it's wielded the right way.
Right.
It's absolutely a superpower.
But I would say it's maybe not a superpower when you're trying to do a church merger. Yeah. Because the very high belief person, what happens is this dying or plateauing church comes to them and they create this 100-point thing that the church that's coming to them has to kind of agree to. And it's like, man, our way or the highway. Yeah. It's black and white. If you don't agree to this, we're not doing the church merger. And it just blows it up at the very beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, any kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, it kind of stops the conversation before it's even begun.
Yeah.
Because these things are nuanced and they are complicated and they are emotional. Nobody wants to talk about that.
Very emotional.
They're extremely emotional. And so you have to go into each of these conversations with high EQ, understanding that this is not just a building to the people on the other side of the table.
Right.
This is their history.
Right.
Some of them got married in that room. Some of them attended funerals in that room. Some of them got saved in that room. Some of them were baptized in that room. And so when you go in with, hey guys, I mean, you're coming to us, here it is, take it or leave it, the conversation's over.
Totally.
It's just totally over. And yeah, you're right. Some people just can't.
Yeah. So I'll advise guys like, hey man, when it comes to a church merger, there are some things that you have to hold to.
Yeah.
Right? There are some things that you're going to have to hold fast to and say, man, we're not going to compromise on this. Yeah. We're not going to change this. But it doesn't have to be everything. Yeah. With every merger that we've done, there were things that I would say we compromised on. Yeah. And I just say compromise in terms of at the very beginning of the process, we didn't think we were going to do that, Yeah. So take the Edgefield merger. That's how you came to Mercy Hill.
Yeah.
I would say, man, the starting point at most mergers would be we're probably not going to have, if there are any staff at that church, the starting point is they're probably not going to immediately come onto our staff.
Yeah.
Right. That's just man, that's just, if we could write it how we wanted to write it, that's how we'd do it.
Yeah.
But, Pastor Tim was like, man, I want you guys to take Randy on the staff.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, most guys in that situation would just blow it up.
Shout out to Tim, by the way.
Shout out to Tim. Most guys, they would just blow it up, right? Their belief would be too high. They'd be like, no, I'm not doing that. Yeah. They're not going to fit our culture. They don't understand the vision. We only hire from within. And they just right on the front end would blow the whole thing up.
Thanks, but no thanks.
And it would end and it would, And then, 10 years later, they'd wonder why they've never been a part of a church merger.
Yeah. Totally.
So you got to learn, okay, what are we going to hold real tight and what are we going to be super flexible on?
Yeah.
For some reason, a lot of pastors just struggle with that, operating in the gray.
Yeah.
The other error, okay, this is on the total other side, is, that church comes to them, the church planner, they start, seeing that building, seeing the opportunity, and they're like, dude, we will compromise on whatever you want.
We're not tied to this vision. Yeah,
we will compromise on anything to make this happen. You know, man, dude, we'll change the name of the church.
Yep.
We'll change the vision.
Yeah.
And it's like, dude, no.
Yeah.
That ain't going to work.
That is a recipe for disaster.
Now, the funny thing is, it actually will probably get the merger to the finish line.
Yeah.
Like the merger will probably happen,
right?
But what will come out of that merger,
right?
The mixing of those two churches will not be pretty.
Yes,
there's a lot of those stories, right?
Yeah,
and because that's one of the keys in church mergers. Like, man, there's got to be a leading church.
Yeah,
you cannot merge vision. Like it just can't be done.
Yeah,
and that's probably one of the things we could talk about in the future episode, but. One of the churches through humility has to come under the vision of another church.
Yeah.
I think to be successful because, dude, there are probably thousands of church merger stories where the merger happened, but both churches probably compromised too much to try to make it happen.
Yeah.
And what came out of the back end there was not great.
There's probably some success story out there that people could point to, but I would agree with you. It's like by and large, man, you give that thing some time. I think those are the exception, not necessarily, the rule. And I think it's really, you raised a good point. I think one of the best things you can do in a merger process is be clear on what is negotiable and what is non-negotiable. Like clarity is absolutely kindness in these processes. Nobody wants to draw that hard line, but you got to come to the table with humility, but you also have to be very clear on like, man, these are things that we're actually not going to budge on. And I'd love to have a conversation with you about that. Again, with a high level of EQ and tact, you know what I mean? It takes a lot of that. So yeah, that's really important, Bob, those two different distinctions.
Yeah, I think it'd be important in a future episode to talk about, okay, what are those things you want to hold on to?
Yeah.
Right? Like what are those guiding principles when you're going into a merger conversation of the things we want to hold on to?
Yeah.
The thing is, they're not as many as you would think.
That's right.
Because we are not operating in right and wrongs here.
That's right.
This is not what's true and not true. This is not Bible. I mean, and that's where pastors, just going back to the first one, that's where they struggle because this is truly operating in the gray.
Yeah.
There's not a manual.
Yep.
Every story's different. There's not a whole lot even in the Bible that's going to guide you.
Yeah.
About, except for like your mission and what you're trying to do, but it's not going to tell you like, man, does the other church have to die first? Do you actually legally merge? Do you not legally merge? How do you accept, if they do have any assets, how do you accept those?
Yeah.
Do their members become members of your church? Do they not? Do you put them through a crazy stringent process and make them all mad or immediately accept them all into your church? It's like, there ain't answers for any of that.
Yeah.
And so then that's where you got to be good at operating in the gray.
That's right.
So yeah, we'll get into that more in the future because I do think that's important. Like, man, what are those things you gotta hold on to?
Yeah, I think it'd be super helpful in future episodes to get into some of the nitty gritty of the how, because like we said, everyone is a little bit different, but I think there are some principles that are the same in each merger. We've talked about some of those a little bit even in this episode, but can't wait to talk about that. That's gonna be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I'll just close out by saying, because I really believe this, and you believe this, and we believe this as a church. We're never going to do like a merger to get like a building.
That's right.
Like it'll be cool, right? If like we got a building.
Yeah.
That's awesome if that's like something that results from it. But like you have to go into a merger situation with like the right intentions, right. Like if you're just going searching for a building, like if you're some young church planner going searching for a building, dude, they will sniff you out so quick.
Yeah.
You get in that first conversation, they just sniff that you want their building. That ain't gonna, that's just gonna kill it. So there has to be a genuine like, man, I truly want what's best for us, for the church we're leading. I truly want what's best for their church. Yeah. And if we can merge that together and make that work together and agree on the right things, then it's like, man, this is a huge kingdom win.
Got to have, both sides have to have that kingdom mindset from day one, because you're right. They can smell that on you. They can see when you're looking around in the building at all the different stuff. Man, it's got to be with the right motives.
Yeah, a lot of time it's going to be the kingdom win to not merge.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Maybe they need to keep doing what they're doing. Maybe it's not going to fit with, your church's vision.
I mean, we've had over a dozen of those conversations.
All the time. Yeah.
Totally.
Yep. So, man, why don't you wrap us up?
Yeah, man. Thanks everybody for checking this out. Like we said, there'll be more episodes in the future. I did want to kind of key you in if you haven't already heard of this. Rich Birch is going to be with us at Mercy Hill on November the 19th for a one-day Breaking Barriers event on inviter culture. There's a link in the description for that, so y'all definitely check that out. And we can't wait to talk more about church mergers in the future.